morning and welcome. We're excited to have you all here. If you want to put who you are and where you're from, and if you're job seeking, you can also put that in our chat.
And if folks wouldn't mind putting their cameras on while we're getting started, just so that I can see people's faces, I would love that. Of course, when we're presenting and stuff, you don't need to have them on, but it's nice to see folks and say hi.
All right, let's get started. I am excited to welcome you all here for Name Your Price here at Think Northwest virtual event. I am Riley O'Brien, the Executive Director of Think Northwest. We do virtual programs. We're trying for once a month, in addition to in-person programs in Oregon and Washington. Just some kind of rules of order as we're in this room. We invite you to put your camera on, but we do ask that you stay muted during the presentations. We're recording this event, so folks can watch it asynchronously during their time. You're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat box with your name and title and company and where you're located. And then you're also welcome to ask any questions throughout the chat. We'll be taking those and giving them to Kate throughout the discussion. So we'll have a chance for those questions to be answered. And then we'll also have a chance towards the end of the session, probably about 5 to 10 minutes, you get to turn on your mics and ask questions directly to Kate. Please, you're welcome to follow us on all of our social media channels. Majority are Think Northwest. And then also you can find out more about our upcoming events, including our Portland Extremely Happy Hour, coming up on Wednesday, November 16th at SGK from 4 to 6 p.m. It's a chance for folks to connect in person with people doing your work within the Oregon and Washington communities. You can find out more about what Think Northwest is and all the things that we're up to at thinknorthwest.org. And then I'm super excited to have Kate join us. Kate Dixon is the principal and founder of Dixon Consulting. She has quite a few books and is a super smart lady. So we're very honored that she was able to join us this morning and provide a little bit of that knowledge to our community. So go ahead and take it away, Kate.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see this okay? All right.
Yes.
So just a little brief bio here. My background is in compensation, how to pay others, but I've also had a couple of very successful coaching and consulting practices. One when my kids were little many years ago, and one that I started 5 years ago. That's the practice that I have now. And I do coaching, workshops, speaking, and then I also do consulting with corporations as well. I'm delighted to let you know that my company got B Corp certified last year. So, the idea of, people, planet, and profit is big for me. But my mission in Dixon Consulting is to help diverse leaders around the world become more successful and more fulfilled, because I believe both things are really necessary. So why we're here today, we really want to help you up your pricing game. So this is really just a starting point. You're not going to learn everything there is to learn about pricing and terms for your agreements and things like that. But at least this should give you a starting point to know kind of more about what you're worth and how to determine that for yourself. We'll talk a little bit about mistakes, because a lot of this learning that I'm going to share with you today is because I made mistakes over the 10 plus years that I've been doing this. And I'd love for you to not make some of the same mistakes that I did. And we'll talk a little bit about some shortcuts as well. And we're going to be talking about hourly rates and why I hate them and why I love them. And we'll talk about packages, so value-added packages. How do you put those together? What kinds of things should you be thinking about? We'll talk about proposals, which are common for consultants and sometimes freelancers as well. We'll talk about raising your prices, and I'll give you some things to say and when you do that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about mindset, what gets in the way of you doing some of this work. And there's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not just about the numbers thing. It's also about how we feel about money and all kinds of things like that. So, whoops. There you go. Just a little quick overview here. We're really focusing on freelancing and consulting pricing, so service pricing. We're not really talking about this group on the left, the temporary employee. And the difference between a temporary employee and a freelancer is a temporary employee is typically working for a temp agency or directly for the employer, has only one client. They might have benefits through their employer. And really the employer or the agency determines a lot of the work and conditions and so on and so forth. Freelancers and consultants are more independent, at least the way that I define it. You're working for yourself. You're typically going to get a 1099 if you're a freelancer, and sometimes with consultants too, because I sometimes get those from my clients. You're going to set your own rates, and you might work for multiple different clients at the same time. So if you're really hoping to get more information about temps, we're not going to be talking about that today, but we'll talk about the other two. So I would love it if you would drop into the chat. When you think about pricing in terms, what makes you most uncomfortable? What kinds of things, when you think about the pricing in terms, are you going, oh God, I don't want to do this, or this really makes me nervous? So I'd love for you to drop that into the chat so that I can see what kinds of things are coming up for you. And as you write in the chat, I'll keep going, but I'd love to know what kinds of things are making you most nervous so that I can really customize the presentation a little bit more for you. All right. Anybody? Put it in the chat. I would love it. Justifying my requested price. Yes. Don't be shy. Yes. Well, yes, don't be shy. Losing a potential job. This is something that, I mean, I still struggle with after 10 plus years. Past due payment notices, projects going over budget. These are all fantastic. Some of these things we're going to dive into in detail. If we don't get as much coverage as you'd like and you feel like you still have questions, hang on to those and we'll get to them in the Q&A session. So standing your ground. Yes, there are a lot of great hints that I can give you about some of these things. So let's readily accept it. Yeah, it's, and so Arla, Jean, you talk about, it makes you uncomfortable. A lot of this stuff does make us uncomfortable. And if it's not making you feel at least a little bit uncomfortable, you're probably not doing it right. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's start out with hourly rates. And again, I have this love-hate relationship with them because I love them as an ingredient, but I don't love them as a standalone thing. Because when people use hourly rates exclusively and just say, oh, you can, I'll do whatever you want to for $200 an hour or whatever. That sets up this dynamic, which I call dollars per hour, right? Which is exactly what that is. And it makes it really easy for the client to separate the value that you're bringing and what they're paying for it. So people have predisposed notions of oh God, nobody should make more than $200 an hour because that's what my parent, who is an attorney, used to charge, and that just was like so much, and they made so much money, right? So people have weird things in their heads, and if you do a dollars per hour kind of arrangement, they're really thinking about that. They may hesitate talking to you because they don't want to get charged for, a 5-minute conversation. And so they may hesitate getting with you in a place that would provide them a lot more value. So we'll talk about, what else to use besides hourly rates. But, the bottom line is that it's a foundation to help you figure out what you should be charging in these other manners, right? Instead of just the hourly rate manner. And it'll help you know when you should go up or down. There are times that you're going to want to discount. There's times that you're going to want to put a premium on things. And if you have an hourly rate as a basis, and again, you don't need to share this with your client, but you probably want to have it as you're putting things together. So I'm going to invite you to consider, when you're positioning yourself in the marketplace, what is it about what you bring as a consultant or coach or freelancer that sets you apart, right? Do you have, extraordinary portfolio? Do you have certain licenses or certifications? Do you have experience at companies that would be really exciting and sexy for your clients to know about? These are things that set you apart, right? And you can charge premiums when you have things that set you apart. What sets your client apart from others? Is it a nonprofit client that you may charge differently than for a for-profit client? Is it a Fortune 10 company versus a startup that has 5 people? What sets this particular engagement apart from others? Is it something that they want? It's the timeline is compressed. And they want a super rush, super intense kind of work with you. That may be something that you charge extra for, right? So think about what sets you apart, what sets the client apart, what sets the engagement apart. So let's look at how you figure it out. So there are online data sources that look at annual salaries, and I'll show you a couple of formulas here on the next slide, but that can be a good place to start. And again, that's not a place to end, but it's, you can get an orientation to what the market is paying for employees, which if you're a freelancer or you're a consultant, you are not one. So there's a premium that's implied, and we'll talk about how to get the, calculate that and stuff. But there are also sources that are specific to freelancing and consulting. And all you need to do is pop open your search engine and say, freelance rates for graphic design or, that kind of thing. Just go out. There's tons of information. There's tons of crowdsourced data. Now, is it all great? No, but at least you can kind of get some ideas on what's happening. And, if you're in a market or you're selling to a market that has premium pricing, like if you're working with a client that's in New York City, even if you're in the Northwest, you may be able to charge more for those clients because they're used to paying more because they're in New York City or San Francisco or London. So, so think about that, right? Look at opposition research. So, I like to know who I'm competing against. So one of the services that I provide in my coaching business is I do salary negotiation coaching. And there are people who do that are popping up all over the place. I'm the only one that I know of who actually worked in compensation for companies. There are a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I just put up my coaching shingle," and all that kind of stuff. But I'm competing against people who don't know how it works on the inside of a company. So trust me when I tell you that I not only use that in my marketing materials, but I also use that to help justify higher prices. What are other people doing? And sometimes you can just, again, pop on your search engine, and some people publish their rates. And I actually do for some of the things that I provide as well. It's good to know what other people are doing, but sometimes people care too much about that. They think that there's a precise number that if they just gather all the data, they will know exactly what to charge, and there is a correct answer and everything else is incorrect. And that is just not a thing. You can charge the equivalent of $200 an hour. You can charge an equivalent of $2,000 an hour. If your client finds the value, there's a whole range of how you might charge. And you really need to decide whether or not you care, because I don't really care how other salary negotiation coaches price their services, because I'm a completely different thing. So think about opposition resources. If you're a part of a professional organization or some sort of a guild, a lot of times they'll have information about your specialty and how much people are charging for that. Online communities, all of those things are really great. So here are 3 ways that you can calculate your annual rate or your hourly rate. And none of these is, like, again, precise or right or whatever, but it will help you kind of narrow in on what feels right to you. And that's a thing, what feels right to you. And you can always adjust things either up or down, although I will always support you raising your prices. I won't always support you lowering your prices, as it is a personal philosophy. But the first one is kind of the standard way that a lot of people figure out their hourly rate. So it's basically modifying an annual rate of a salaried person within an organization and applying a multiplier that essentially makes up for some of the extra taxes that we have to pay as independent contractors or consultants or whatever, as well as benefits. So I generally recommend that people use 1.3 to 1.5, or if you're feeling very assertive about it, 1.7 is totally fine. And so basically you take your annual salary divided by 2080, which is the number of working hours in a year, multiply that by your 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, and then you'll get an hourly rate. And so $60,000 gets you $40.38 per hour. And you might go, wow, that's sucky low. I don't want that. Okay, well, then think about doubling your minimal acceptable rate. So if you think, okay, well, 45 would be the absolute rock bottom that I would ever take, double it. That's $90. Okay, maybe that starts to feel a little bit better to you, right? And then the third one is a little different. This one is a billable hours concept. And, again, there's a lot more that we could talk about in terms of billable hours. But essentially, what you're doing is you're thinking about, okay, this is the number of hours that I want to be able to bill a client in the year. And that is the annual rate I want to make. And so I'm just going to do the math, right? So if I want to make 80 grand and I think that I'm going to bill 1,000 hours, which PS, and by the way, is pretty aggressive unless you have, a single client that is going to, this is billing 20 hours a week, right? Again, kind of assertive if you're looking at trying to get multiple clients and all that kind of jazz. But just for the sake of argument, $80,000 divided by the 1,000 hours that you can bill in a year, then that results in $80 an hour. So these are 3 different methodologies. Again, I would encourage you to use all of them. as if you're really starting out with trying to figure out how much you should charge, try all these things and see what starts to feel right, what starts to be reflective of what you're seeing in the marketplace, and we'll go from there. I am going to have to move this here because I can't see my little advancer thing. Okay, so we're going to talk about value-added packages next. And you've seen these. You may not have used them in the past, but these are just a couple of really quick examples that I pulled off the internet. And you might have 3 different packages, and that they offer different features. And then, you can see, some of these are like, oh, 2 to cover design concepts, and 3 and 4. And, oh, there's all these like, oh, it's an ebook conversion and photo retouching that comes in, the higher packages, right? And again, I do packages for all of my coaching work, just because I think it's great and I love it. But what's typically included, is what they get. So this is, again, the features, right? How much time with you, how much, how often. So if you're doing a, freelance graphic design package, so maybe it's up to, 10 hours of design, or whatever. If you're creating a kind of a workshop thing, time with others. So if they have time as small groups that you're going to facilitate, that's something that's of value. You're going to want to put a value on each one of these, even if you don't do it, demonstrate it to your clients. You're going to want to, put those values on it so that you know how to price it well. Any kind of tools or templates or resources that you offer with your package. So, maybe you're doing social media stuff and you have a little, electronic template that will help people, kind of keep things organized. That is something that is of value. You may not think, it's like, oh, well, this is just, I use this all the time, it's no big deal. If your client doesn't already have access to it, that is a value, and don't just like give it to them as if it has no value, right? Highlight that. And make sure you take a little bit of time to name things as well. I know it's a little, controversial, but the whole good, better, best concept, but with a name that is sexier than good, better, best, can really have some great results for you. The next piece is really the benefits. So features and benefits, right? The way that I always encourage people to think about it is, and this is so great because, right, this is the impact that it's going to have on your client, which is what they care about. And you're going to want to spend some time really thinking about, the value that your client is going to get from each piece of the package. And then terms, we're going to spend a little bit more time on terms with proposals, but it's important to include terms in value-added packages as well, because you're going to want to really state what time period are we talking about. So I have coaching packages, executive coaching packages, and I do a 90-day intensive, I do a 6-month package, and I do a 12-month package. And it's important to put these time boundaries on there, because otherwise sometimes what will happen is, the client will be like, oh, well, I want to hold on to 3 sessions and use them over the next 2 years. And that can be really challenging for you as a coach or a consultant, because you're trying to, plan your work. And if you have these outstanding obligations, it can go out to infinity, and that doesn't serve you, and it actually doesn't serve the client. They need to know kind of what those guardrails are. Money back guarantees. I don't offer money back guarantees when I'm working with corporate clients, but I do, because it's not a common practice, but I do with individuals. And, you know, in all the time that I've been serving individuals, I have never had anybody take me up on the guarantee, but it does tend to reduce the barriers to purchasing for folks, especially, at a higher price level. If they know that, hey, in 30 days, if I don't love this, I'm going to get my money back, it's pretty great. Again, don't have the guarantee go out till you've provided all of the value. 30-day guarantee makes sense for a 90-day, 6-month, or 12-month package, but it wouldn't make sense if you give, if you're providing all the value to the client within that 30 days. So think about that. You should also have information on pricing, and I typically, the pricing that I give people is if they pay for everything up front. On packages, it's a little different for consulting, but and then if they want to have some sort of payment, kind of a thing where they pay a certain amount upfront and then a certain amount monthly, I accommodate that. But I also give them an upcharge for that. I charge generally 15% more. And there's a number of reasons that I do that, but it's really to help protect you. And it's also to recognize the additional risk and the additional cost of doing more billing cycles. So let's talk now a little bit about proposals. These are, this is how I work my consulting practice, is making sure that we do proposals. And what I include in the proposal is a brief. What is the problem that they're trying to solve? What's the situation that they're in? And then I go into what do they get? What kind of deliverables am I going to give them? What are the results that they're going to be able to see? I try to do some rough time frames, but I also put disclaimers about time frames because sometimes clients don't make themselves available and all that kind of jazz. So I make sure that I'm flexible about that. Talk about the resources that I'm bringing to bear on the project. So if I'm partnering with another consultant, we talk about that as well. And then terms become more important, especially as the time frame gets bigger and bigger. The investment from the client gets bigger and bigger. Payment terms, right? So this is one of the things that I talk to my pricing clients about a lot. You can dictate payment terms for a lot of the work that you're doing. If you're working with a large corporation, they're probably going to ask you to sign their agreement. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is ask them to be able to redline it, because there are going to be some terms in there that are not favorable to you. I always have my own agreement that reflects what I think is a fair deal, with my payment terms and so on and so forth. If you have to comply with somebody else's payment terms and they're not very favorable to you, you can charge more to that client. You just can't do it after the fact, right? So understand what you're getting into, and if they want you to shift your payment terms around, and some of these large companies are just kind of ridiculous about it. It's like, we'll give you your money in 45 days if you give us a 3% discount on it. It's like, no, that doesn't seem right. But if that's the only way that they work with contractors, then it's like, okay, well, if that's what you're going to do, then I'm going to do an upcharge and make sure that I get my 3% covered. And I'm also going to charge more because I don't get my money for 45 days. Where normally with my clients, I require a substantial upfront investment. So anyway, so cancellation terms important. What happens if they decide to abandon the project? How much are you going to get paid? Learned this one the hard way. But like if you're going to do some sort of an event, or you're going to be in person with them, and you're going to want to make sure that if they cancel within, say 2 weeks of the date, that you get paid, 100% for that, whether or not they go through with it. And you can have a cancellation term that if it's within 2 months of the event, then they owe you 50% or whatever. But make sure that you're protecting yourself in the cancellation, because if you're not, then you may do a ton of work on behalf of the organization and then wind up with nothing. Revisions. This is something that is important for me when I'm, producing communications or training or things like that for a client. I always specify the number of revisions that they can make within the scope of the agreement, and that additional revisions would be extra. And, we would have an addendum that, if that comes into play, then I'd write an addendum that said, okay, well, we want to have 2 more sets of revisions, and this is how much that's going to cost. Contracts. Again, you don't have to sign a contract that comes from a client company directly. Work with an attorney to make sure that the terms are protecting you. One of the things that you should know in the US as a consultant, you automatically own the intellectual property that you're producing. And that's a really important thing that you don't want to give up in a contract, especially if you might, if you're using a proprietary method, or a method that you want to be using with other clients. You don't want to give that away, and you especially don't want to be put in a position where your client could monetize that. Unless you do want to put, have them do that, and that's part of what you're selling, right? But be very conscientious about the rights that you're giving up, because the way that corporate contracts typically are written, they're like, hey, anything that you do with us, we own it, and we can sell it, and it's ours, and you can't use it anymore. And so I virtually never will sign something that's like that. And be very careful about things in somebody else's agreement that talks about work for hire and things like that. So again, it will behoove you to get an attorney to look at contracts and stuff. NDAs, so non-disclosure agreements. I think that it's important that the company knows that you're not going to be, blabbing about the work that you're doing with them to other people. If you contract with, let's just say Nike, my former employer, if you have work that you're doing with Nike, and they want to say, hey, you can only work with us if you're working with a footwear, sportswear company. You can't work with Adidas. You can't work with North Face. You can't work with Patagonia. We want to have you exclusive to Nike. That's okay. They get to pay for that pleasure, right? If they're holding you out of certain pieces of the marketplace, that is something that you should charge extra for, and you need to know about that up front. So those are kind of some considerations with proposals. I want to talk a little bit about raising prices. This is a place where a lot of my clients get really nervous, right? How do I time it? How do I transition a current client to a higher rate? How much is too much? Basically timing, the rule is you can do it whenever you want. But the most common times that folks do this or are, when they're engaging with a new proposal. And with proposals and stuff, it's not necessarily really transparent to the client. So you can do this and they don't know what you're doing. You're just charging more and whatever. But if you're offering like a coaching package or something that they can see what the pricing is, um, and you're transitioning to higher prices, um, at that renewal time is a natural time for you to do that. Also, a footnote on that, even if you do raise your prices when it's in the middle of somebody's 6 or 12 month package, they get the rate that they contracted with you. Make sure that they know that. But when you want to transition, one of the things that you can do is extend your current pricing in exchange for early renewal. So let's imagine that you have a package or a retainer that you do, and it's an annual kind of a fee, and they've been paying 20 grand for an annual retainer of 3 hours a month or whatever, I don't know. So it's pretty transparent. They can see that you're charging them $20,000 for an annual thing, and your prices next year are going to be $25,000 for that same retainer. So what you could do is you could say, hey, my prices are going to go up as of January 2023. I love working with you, and because you're such a great client of mine, I'm willing to extend our current pricing for the first quarter of 2023 if you renew by November 1st. Again, all of those dates and times and numbers are really flexible, but the thing that's nice about that is they feel like, oh, they're taking care of me, and I don't have to pay the higher rate until April of next year or July of next year, or however you want to frame it up. And the thing that you're getting is you're getting them to sign the paperwork in advance, so you don't have to wonder when you're planning your next calendar year. How much is too much? So my recommendation on this is that you need to be uncomfortable. You need to be uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be something that makes you throw up or need to take anti-anxiety meds, if you don't already take them. It should be a slightly uncomfortable thing, because if it feels really good and you're like, hey, I've been charging 200, the market rate for this is actually 400, I'm going to charge it 250, and that's super comfortable for me. If it's really, really comfortable for you, really question yourself. Is it high enough to really reflect the value that you're bringing to your client? If it is, that's fine. But it should be, if it's really comfortable, that's your hint to question what you're doing. This last piece here, don't climb into their wallets. You don't know. I mean, people will say, oh, I couldn't possibly afford this. I couldn't possibly afford a $6,000, coaching package. And then the next week they'll go out and buy an $80,000 car, right? I mean, people prioritize spending for the things that they value, and you can't know what their capacity to pay is, especially for a corporate client. And it's a really easy thing for people. Oh, we just don't have the money in the budget. Okay, well, that's fine. Oh, well, we'd really love to work with you, but we can only pay you $50 an hour. Okay, that's fine. But you need to decide whether that's worth it to you. And one thing that I should also add in here too is, if a client wants, if you put out a consulting proposal and your client says, oh, well, this proposal that you had cost $50,000, we can't pay more than, 35,000. That's our budget for this. It's not the moment you say, well, screw it, I'm out. I never want to work with you again. And it's not the time to say, okay, well, I'll do everything that I said in my proposal and I'll do it for 35,000. That's the moment that you can say, well, I would love to work with you, and I'm happy to adjust pricing to 35,000 to meet your budget. Let's talk about what comes out. What decrease the scope to match that 35,000. Right, for 35,000, we can do the strategy session, we can do this thing and that thing. We won't be able to design the communications on the back end, and we won't be able to do training, but everything else we can do for 35,000. And I'm happy to work one-on-one, give you a one-on-one coaching session on how you can build those items yourself, right? And that's what we can do for 35,000. It's a really important distinction. And the same thing goes with scope creep, right? One of the things you need to make sure that you're doing is not, specifying what you're not doing, right? This proposal includes this, and this. Excluded from this proposal is, revisions above, 2 times, communication drafting, social media posting, or, I don't know what's excluded. And that you'd be happy to provide those services under a separate agreement. And we can talk about how to do that if you're interested in Q&A. But so let's talk quickly about mindset. Again, one of the things that is fascinating about pricing is that, we're socialized around money a lot, and, it's not polite to ask for more, and, you shouldn't know how much things cost, and money is the root of all evil, all that kind of stuff. So pricing can get really a little dicey. So I love to give these hints on what to say and how to say it. So if you're increasing your prices, like we were talking about just a minute ago, I'll be increasing my prices to X starting March 1st, starting August 19th, starting in the new year, right? It's open. You're clear about it. You're just doing the statement. Don't apologize. I'm sorry to have to tell you my prices are going up. Don't apologize. Companies don't apologize when they raise their product prices. It just, they just do it, right? Don't apologize, because when you do, it weakens your position. I talk a lot about salary negotiation and negotiation of things. This pricing is not really a negotiation. And so you need to treat it like, hey, this is how things work, right? This is how it works. Not, well, I want to charge you $40 an hour, but if, I really would do it for 30 because I totally want to work with you. Don't be doing that. Again, minimize the scope if you want to accommodate their pricing, but you don't always have to do that either. So, be clear when you're changing pricing. Make sure that your clients know that their current pricing will still be honored till the end of the year or till the end of their contract or whatever it is, because they don't always know and they might get a little nervous, and you want to allay their fears. The last thing, my new contract has an updated cancellation policy. And this may or may not be from real life. You left me high and dry last month, so I put something in the contract and can't do it again. Yeah, I mean, again, the more that you can just be frank and upfront and have thought through all the scenarios in your terms, the better it's going to work out for you. So if you are having a conversation about pricing or about raising your pricing or any of those kinds of things, having a contract discussion or a consulting agreement discussion, think about the baggage that you're bringing into the conversation and try to get rid of it before you have the conversation. So you may have some limiting beliefs about yourself. Oh God, I'm not worth it. I'm just a junior person and I shouldn't be charging this much. Get rid of that before you get on the call. Get rid of the assumptions that you have. Well, they're a nonprofit, so they can't pay me, so I should just do this for free. And I'm here to tell you, having had many nonprofit clients over the years, many of them are funded to pay you appropriately. I offer discounts to my nonprofit clients, but I don't do things for free for them. Now, I do pro bono work as well, but we're not talking about that. Discounts and stuff, think really clearly about what your intent is before you just automatically assume that they can't pay you. Shift your mindset a little bit. So it's scary. Having these conversations is scary, especially if you're an independent consultant or a single member LLC, because with services and stuff, you're really selling yourself as a product. That's kind of what the services are, and it can be very, very scary. And I don't want to minimize that at all, but dwelling in the fear is going to hamstring you. And you really would benefit from imagining the possibilities, right? Well, I may not be able to close the sale. I may not be able to get people to say yes, but what if they do? What is possible if they say yes? And some of the stuff you're just going to have to go out on a limb and, try it and see if it works, right? The scarcity mindset. I see people do this a lot with making, trying to close a proposal. It's like, oh my God, I have to get this. If I don't get this, everything is going to be terrible and, my business will collapse and it's very horrible, right? But think about things as expansively as you can, the abundance, the growth mindset. It's going to serve you a lot better. And instead of trying to close a sale, and that's I got to get them to say yes. If you're really in the mindset of helping them make a decision, that is a service. And they are in this I haven't decided mode. And that's hard on the client. You need to get them to decision, whether it's selecting you or not selecting you. And if you're focused on closing the sale, that negative energy, that grabby energy is going to be all over you, and it's going to really make clients run away. Think about how you want to show up. You're giving them an idea of what it is like to work with you when you give them a proposal, right? So everything from how that proposal is worded to, how prompt are you with your meetings with them, all of that kind of stuff, they're going to be thinking about subconsciously, most likely, about, well, is Kate somebody I really want to work with? And use every opportunity to show up the way that you want to be perceived. I also love to recommend meditation for folks when they're getting ready to get on an emotional call like this. Just sitting still or meditating for 5 minutes. And then, thinking about how you want to show up and then getting on your call, that can work miracles. So we covered hourly rates, packages, proposals, raising prices, and mindset. I would challenge you to put into the chat what from the talk today are you going to take back to your own practice? What aha did you have that you want to take back? And as you write that, let me just tell you, I wrote a book about this stuff, and I go into a lot more detail about how to calculate hourly rates and what kinds of things you should include in your proposals, even scripts on how to, raise your prices. I talk a lot about discounts, when to offer them, what's a good idea to offer a discount on, what's not a good idea to offer a discount on. You don't want to make yourself smaller if you don't need to. I've got articles about pricing and as well as tons of other stuff on my website, katedixon.org. Please feel free to email me if you have questions that we don't get to today at info@katedixon.org. And then, my book is available in a lot of places. So Barnes and Noble and Amazon have both the paperback and the ebook, and then the ones that are not in bold, Apple, Google Play, Kobo, and then there's also a bunch more. Those you can get the book on ebook. So appreciate your time and attention. Let's go to Q&A. So, whoops. I am not having a good time here. So who has questions for me?
I don't have a question, but I'd like to say that this has been extremely helpful information. It's nice to have such a grounded and confident conversation around something that can feel a little bit squirrely. So thank you so much for talking with us about all of this.
I'm so happy to do it. So I am looking through here. Let's see, ways of packaging out cancellation fees. It's sensitive. It really is. This is hard. And when you realize that it's hard for everybody, but the more that you do it, the more you think about how you want things to work, the easier it gets. It really does. I don't apologize I ask for in my consulting contracts, depending on how big they are, I ask for 50%, 30%, or 20% upfront. Because and I won't do any work until I get that initial payment. And part of that is, I need to train my clients how to treat me. And I also don't want to work for free. I don't want to, if it's a really small thing that's like, $5,000 or less, I'll ask for 50% up front and then I'll bill them 50% at the end, right? For some of these large contracts that are, gonna take me 6 months or whatever, I generally ask for 30% up front and then I bill the remainder in monthly installments until the end of when I think we're going to work together. But I will, if it's a big enough thing, I will, that's one thing that I will negotiate, that I'll take it down to 20% if I need to, and with the other payment terms. So let's see, what else?
Could you explain a little bit when you mentioned that you wouldn't sign a contract that's work for hire? So for instance, in a creative industry, a lot of times agencies, the client ends up owning the work product, not even the agency. So can you just speak to that a little bit?
I think it's one of those things that I think you need to talk with your attorney about, right? And with a lot of the creative stuff, you're right that you're creating a logo for them, or you're creating art for them, or whatever, and you don't own the rights to that. But I, especially if you're not in a creative thing and you see work for hire, I always get a little twitchy personally, and if you're giving them rights it's important for them to understand what rights that you are giving to them. Like, again, I design training programs sometimes for people, and I tell them that, it's my product, it's, my IP, and I'm giving them an unlimited license to use it. Right.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
again, your attorney can help you better phrase that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's more case by case, depending on what the deliverables are.
100%.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. What else?
Kate, I just want to say, I don't have a question so much as, I started my career as a freelancer a few decades ago, and I've been in that mode most of my career, with a couple of small stints as an employee that didn't work. It really was the company I kept, or the company I worked for, but I find myself in a situation now where I'm helping a friend who has a fantastic business idea that she's launched and trying to get it off the ground. And I have over delivered. It's a short contract. I have over delivered, and every time I'm asked for something that's out of scope, I just keep saying the same refrain. I'm happy to help you with that. It's going to delay our current project, and I'm going to have to charge you more. And the requests are starting to come in less frequently, but because it's a friend and I care about her, and there's the dual relationship, it feels a little bit sticky. And so, just being here and hearing what you were saying and reminding myself, like, most of us have these issues that come up from time to time, if not a lot of the time. And I'm not alone. So it really helps to reinforce, like, oh, I do know what to do, and it's business, and I have to do it regardless of the friendship.
It's not personal. And that's, that is something that, again, it feels intensely personal because it's, person as a service, right? But it's not, it's really, if you can kind of get that emotional distance, that helps, which is really challenging when you're doing work with friends or family, right? And one of the things that we didn't cover, but I think is really important, is if you offer discount to somebody, like a nonprofit, which I do, or friends and family discount or whatever, I make sure that they know that they're getting a discount, And my practice is, for nonprofits, I offer a 30% discount. And I put that in, the proposal and in the agreement, and, I'm pleased to offer you a 30% discount for blah, blah, blah. Right. So that they know that, and hopefully value that, that discount that you're offering them too. So,
well, thank you for all of this.
My pleasure. What else? I think we have time for one more question. Riley, are there any from the ones that were submitted that you want to highlight real quick?
Yes, let me just grab that one. I think you covered a lot of the questions that were asked during the registration process. I think the majority were, the one that potentially you could cover is how to move to retainer and how you implement one.
Yeah. Well, that is something that I go into quite a bit in the book, but I personally don't love to use retainers with clients until after I've worked with them a little bit, because I want to know, are they, how do they use time, right? Are they ones that are, try to suck the brains out of your head and, are always constantly asking, questions on email and, all of this kind of stuff, because I want to make sure that I'm pricing things appropriately and that they also understand the value that I'm bringing to them. And I don't feel really confident about clients really understanding the value and until we work together, to be honest. So, but it is a really common model that I use. So I might do a big project for a client, and then we'll move to a retainer after that. I'm very specific on, they get up to this many hours per month, over, this many months time frame. They can roll over so many hours into the next month. And the larger the package, the more hours I allow them to go over. But again, some of the stuff is really around being strategic and planning my own business, right? I don't want somebody to have a 50-hour retainer over 6 months and then use none of those until the last month, and oh my God, then they want to have schedule 50 hours. Well, I don't have 50 hours in a month to give them. I have 50 hours in 6 months, and maybe I allow them to roll over an hour or two per month, but otherwise, I don't want to get jammed up, and I don't want them to jam up either. I want them to use the hours that we have together. But yeah, I try to be, really specific about the kinds of work that we can do within the scope of the retainer. And I'm pretty flexible with those, typically. But again, when I've had an opportunity to work with a client, I can imagine some of the things that they might want us to do together, over the scope of the retainer. And so I try to put those into the agreement as well. But yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. We're so appreciative of you giving your time to us today. I echo what was said in the chat, is that these are just incredibly valuable sessions, and the time and it takes to put them on for the folks who are participating. We are just so appreciative. It's a great support to our community. So thank you again. We should have this up for a few months on our YouTube, for folks to kind of reflect back on what was talked about today. And then we'll also be sending out a blog post with just kind of some updates to folks. And you can always find these sessions at thinknorthwest.org. But thank you again for spending your time with us today. We look forward to seeing you at future in-person and virtual events. Take care, everybody.